Linda Matthews had spent a lifetime making careful choices. A retired banker, a mother, a widow at 62. She had built a life on stability, responsibility, and trust. But loneliness is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It lingers, waiting. And when it finally spoke, Linda listened. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't desperate. She was simply searching for what had been taken from her. A hand to hold, a voice at the end of the day, the comfort of knowing she wasn't alone. So, like millions of others, she turned to a screen. To messages sent in the glow of a late-night phone. To a man whose words made her believe love was possible again. But love is built on trust. And trust is a dangerous thing in the wrong hands. This is the story of Linda Matthews, a woman who followed her heart and found herself fighting for her life. Linda Matthews had spent her life making careful decisions. 35 years in banking had taught her how to read the fine print, how to weigh the risks, and how to protect herself from mistakes. But the numbers on a balance sheet couldn't prepare her for this. She never expected to be alone at 62. After decades of marriage, losing her husband felt like losing a part of herself. The house, once filled with conversation and laughter, had turned quiet. Too quiet. Her children had their own lives. Friends checked in, but the loneliness was always there, lingering in the background. So one evening, in the quiet glow of her laptop screen, Linda did something she never thought she would do. She joined an online dating site. She wasn't looking for just anyone. She wasn't reckless. She wanted companionship, someone to talk to at the end of the day, someone to remind her what it felt like to be seen. And then she found him. Michael Mensah. A businessman. Tall, handsome, and successful. Originally from Ghana, but living between Accra and London, managing an import-export business. His messages were polite and engaging. He wasn't like the others who sent generic compliments. He asked about her life, her dreams. He made her laugh. The connection was immediate. He listened. He remembered details. He sent messages every morning before she woke up and love notes before she went to bed. Soon, there were late-night calls, long conversations where he told her she was special, different from anyone he had ever met. And then, the video calls. His face filled her screen, smiling just for her. He called her my queen. He told her he loved her. Linda was falling, and for the first time in years she felt alive again. But not everyone was convinced. A conversation, voices overlapping, concerned, skeptical. Her friends were wary. Her children were blunt. Be careful, Mom. You don't really know him. People lie online. How do you know he's real? Linda pushed their concerns aside. She wasn't naive. She had seen his face and heard his voice. She had proof. He wasn't some stranger behind a screen. He was real. He loved her. But love, real love, doesn't come with urgency. It doesn't ask for favors. And Michael? Michael always needed something. A phone screen, a message appears. Urgent. It started small. A business deal gone wrong, a delay in payments, a sudden family emergency. He was embarrassed, ashamed to ask, but he had no one else to turn to. Could she help? Just this once? A few $100s at first. Then more. Linda hesitated. The banker in her was cautious, but Michael reassured her. He sent documents, business contracts, and official-looking bank statements. He even called her with his lawyer to prove everything was legitimate. He always paid her back, just like he promised, and she believed him. And then, the ultimate request. Linda stared at her passport. The cursor hovers over a flight confirmation. He wanted her to visit, to see his world, to meet his business partners and his family, to finally be together. He told her he was serious, that he wanted to marry her. She had doubts, but love drowns out reason. He had spent months proving himself, and despite the warnings, despite the quiet voice in the back of her mind telling her to slow down, Linda made another choice. She packed her bags, and she got on the plane. What awaited her in Accra was nothing like the life he had promised. The moment Linda Matthews stepped off the plane in Accra, she felt excited. A new country, a new beginning. A man was waiting for her, ready to build the life he had promised. She had dreamed of this moment for months, but dreams and reality are rarely the same. The first sign was small, almost forgettable. Michael had promised to be there, waiting just outside the terminal. But when Linda stepped into the arrival hall, scanning the sea of unfamiliar faces, he was nowhere to be seen. Her phone buzzed. A message. Flight delays kept me from reaching the airport in time, my love. I sent my driver. He'll take care of you. Linda hesitated. She had expected him, not a stranger. But then a man approached, holding a small sign with her name. Michael sent me, he said. His voice was calm, reassuring. Let's go. Outside, the city was alive. Cars honked, people bustled in every direction. Linda followed the driver to a waiting car. Older, worn, the air thick with heat and unfamiliar scents. As they pulled away from the airport, she expected to see the city skyline, the vibrant streets of Accra she had read about. Instead, the buildings thinned, the roads narrowed, the streetlights became sparse. She glanced at the driver. Where are we going? Michael's house, he said simply. Just a little outside the city. Linda watched the buildings fade into open land. The roads turned rough, unpaved. An hour passed. Then another. The GPS on her phone had stopped loading. She stared out at the vast, dark landscape, unease creeping in. By the time they arrived, the city was a distant memory. The car rolled to a stop outside a modest concrete home. No city skyline, no modern estate, just a house in the middle of nowhere. The door opened, and there he was. A man steps into the dim porch light. Michael Mensah. But not the Michael Mensah from her screen. The man before her was older, shorter. His face is familiar, but not quite right. He smiled, his voice smooth and warm. Linda, my love? Finally, you're here. She hesitated. Something was wrong. But then he pulled her into an embrace, his arms firm around her. He smelled like cologne and something else. Something unfamiliar. Something she couldn't name. You're tired, he said. Come inside. You'll feel better after some rest. Linda wanted to ask questions, wanted to say something. But exhaustion weighed heavy. She had traveled thousands of miles for this. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe jet lag was clouding her mind. So she followed him inside. The house was small and sparsely furnished. No personal photos, no signs of the man she had imagined. But Michael was warm and attentive. He held her hand and made her tea. He apologized for not meeting her at the airport, blaming business troubles. He told her he loved her, that she was safe. But love shouldn't come with missing pieces. She noticed things. The way he avoided direct answers. The way he kept his phone screen turned away from her. The way his stories shifted. Details never quite lined up. And then, the biggest red flag of all. Her passport. He took it from her hands, laughing. For safety, my love, just so nothing happens to it. Then, her internet stopped working. No Wi-Fi. No signal. Her phone, suddenly useless. The first night, she barely slept. The room was small, and the bed was hard. She stared at the ceiling, a feeling gnawing at her gut. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, but she had no way to prove it. By the third day, her bank account showed a withdrawal. A large one. Money missing. Gone. Michael, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Did you use my card? He laughed, his tone light, but his eyes sharp. Of course not. Maybe there's a problem with your bank. Excuses, smiles that didn't reach his eyes, promises that sounded thinner each time he made them. And then she heard him. Late at night, talking on the phone. His voice was low and urgent. She moved closer to the door, held her breath, listened. She doesn't suspect anything, he said. She's completely isolated now. Silence. Then another voice, a different language. She couldn't understand the words, but the tone, dark, decisive, sent a shiver through her spine. Then Michael's response, I'll handle her soon. Linda's blood ran cold. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't his future wife. She wasn't even a woman in love. She was a hostage. Linda Matthews had spent her life trusting her instincts. But trust had brought her here, to a house in the middle of nowhere, in a country where she had no contacts, no way to reach her family, and no way to call for help. Her money was disappearing. Her passport was gone. And now she had overheard something that made her blood run cold. She was a target. A woman alone, isolated, vulnerable. But Linda was not the kind of woman to sit back and wait for her fate to be decided. She knew she had to escape, but she had to be careful. Michael was watching her, controlling her every move. If he suspected she knew the truth, she wouldn't get another chance. So she pretended. She smiled. She played along. She let him believe she was still the woman who had fallen in love with him. And as she did, she watched, she listened, and she waited. Linda Matthews knew she was running out of time. The walls were closing in. Her money was disappearing. Her phone was useless. And outside, past the locked door, men were watching her every move. Michael had people, men who worked for him, men who called him boss and obeyed without question. And Linda knew, if she was going to escape, she needed help. Someone who had access to the outside world. Someone who might be willing to talk. Then she saw him, one of Michael's boys, younger, less hardened. She had seen him run errands, take calls, and sometimes even joke around. He wasn't like the others. Maybe, just maybe, he would listen. So she took a risk. That night, when Michael was away, she waited until the house was quiet, then stepped outside. The air was thick with humidity, the scent of dust and burning wood in the distance. She found him sitting on the porch, smoking a cigarette, his eyes scanning the dark horizon. She kept her voice low. "Careful." "Please," she whispered. "I need to get out of here." He turned to her, exhaling slowly, his gaze unreadable. "And why would I help you?" She hesitated. She didn't know what to say or how to make him understand. "I have money," she said. "I can pay you. Just get me to the police. The embassy. Anything." For a moment he was silent. Then he smiled. A slow, deliberate smile that sent a chill through her body. "Money?" he repeated. "You think I don't have money?" He stood, stepping closer. Too close. "You want help," he murmured. "Maybe we can work something out." His hand touched her arm, lightly at first, then firmer. His meaning was clear. Linda's stomach twisted. She stepped back, shook her head. "No, that's not." He grabbed her wrist, yanking her closer, his breath hot against her skin. "You want me to risk my neck for you?" he said. "Then you give me something in return." Linda pulled away, heart hammering. "I'll scream," she whispered, fear clawing at her throat. "Michael will." His laugh was low, cold. "Michael?" He leaned into. "You think he cares? You think he doesn't know already?" And then the slap. He slapped her. The force of it sent her stumbling, her vision blurred, her cheek stung, but worse than the pain was the realization she had miscalculated. There was no kindness here, no help, just power, just control. He crouched beside her, voice low and sharp. "You keep your mouth shut," he said, "or next time it won't be just a slap." Linda nodded, not because she agreed, but because she needed him to believe she was broken. Because now she knew the truth. There was no one in this house who would save her. If she wanted to survive, she had to save herself. Then she noticed her chance, one person who might help her. Michael's men were everywhere, watching, waiting. She had already learned that trust was a dangerous thing, but there was still one person who might be on her side. The maid. She wasn't like every other person she had seen. She looked at Linda with something close to sympathy. And Linda took the risk. She had seen the way the girl looked at her. Pity maybe, fear, definitely. But there was something else, hesitation, as if she too was trapped in this world Michael had built. So, one afternoon while cleaning the room, Linda whispered the words that could get them both killed. "Help me." The maid stiffened, didn't look at her, kept wiping the table as if nothing had happened. But Linda saw it, the slight shake in her hands, the way her breath hitched. "If I stay here, I won't make it out alive," Linda whispered. "I know you don't want to be part of this." The girl glanced toward the door. Then in the softest voice, "You can't go through the front. The guards, they won't let you." "Then tell me how," Linda pleaded. The maid hesitated. Then finally, "At night, when they start drinking." The maid gave her the details. There was an old storage room at the back of the house, its door rusted, barely locked. It led to a side alley, hidden by overgrown trees. From there, she could reach the dirt road leading to town. The maid gave her information. The closest town, a road she could take, a small police outpost miles away. But there was still one problem. Her passport. Without it, she wouldn't make it far. Linda knew Michael kept it in the house. She had seen him take it into his room. Late that night, while he slept, she crept through the hallway, heart pounding, every step a risk. The drawer, locked. She scanned the room, his bag. Carefully, she unzipped it. Her hands shook as she rummaged through papers, cash, an old phone, then finally her passport. She slipped back into her room. Held the passport to her chest. She had it. Now she just had to get out. The next night, Michael left as usual. His men were gathered drinking. He would be gone for a few hours. It was her only chance. The maid left the back door unlocked. The night was quiet, too quiet. Every step she took felt deafening. She followed the dirt path, heart hammering. The maid's whispered instructions replaying in her head. Follow the road. Stay hidden. Don't stop until you see the town. A car. Headlights in the distance. Linda dropped into the shadows. Was it him? Had he found out? The car slowed. She held her breath. Then, after what felt like an eternity, it drove past. She ran. For hours she moved through the darkness, feet aching, lungs burning, until finally she saw it. A police station. Small, barely more than a concrete building with a flickering light, but it was her only hope. Linda stumbled inside, breathless, exhausted. She tried to explain. She had been taken, lied to, stolen from. She needed help. But the officers weren't listening. They asked questions she couldn't understand. They exchanged glances, uninterested. And then, one officer leaned forward. You came here willingly, didn't you? They didn't want to help. Maybe they were corrupt. Maybe they didn't care. But Linda knew one thing, she wasn't safe here. Then, a thought, her last card to play. The U.S. Embassy, she said. Take me to the U.S. Embassy. The officers hesitated, but a foreigner in distress was bad for business. After a long discussion, one finally agreed to take her. By morning, she stood in front of the U.S. Embassy gates. The moment she stepped inside, the weight on her chest lifted. She was safe. The embassy staff moved quickly. They checked her name, her passport, and then confirmation. Michael Mensa wasn't a businessman. He wasn't even Michael Mensa. He was a fraud, a criminal, a scammer as wanted for multiple cases across Ghana and beyond. A man who had done this before, a man who would do it again. Linda wasn't his first victim. She wouldn't have been his last. While Linda was trapped in that house, her family had been trying to reach her. Calls unanswered, messages undelivered, her children panicked, her friends worried. Then they started searching. They called the airline, they called the embassy, they even contacted local authorities in Accra, but no one had answers. Days passed, then weeks. The silence stretched. Then, a call from the U.S. Embassy. Linda was alive. She was coming home. When she landed in the U.S., her children were waiting. The moment they saw her, they ran. She held them tight, the weight of everything crashing down. She had survived, but she would never be the same. Linda's story is not unique. Every year, thousands fall victim to online scams and promises of love that lead to deception and danger. She thought she was talking to a man who loved her. Instead, she was talking to a ghost, a carefully crafted illusion. Linda Matthews was lucky she escaped, but many don't. This is her story, a warning, a lesson, and a reminder that trust in the wrong hands can be the most dangerous thing of all. Romance scams don't just happen to the lonely or the naive. They happen to smart, successful, caring people, people like Linda, like anyone. By sharing this video, you could save someone from falling into the same trap. Your voice matters. Your warning could be the reason someone asks the right questions before it's too late. Leave a comment below. Have you or someone you know been targeted by an online scam? Tell your story. Let's start a conversation. Don't forget to subscribe to True Crime Tales for more crime story.